My dad brought a skull back from Mexico. Written by Bridal123. So, my parents don't travel that often. Yes, my dad may have been a musician, but I can truly say that the only time he has traveled for work was about a year ago this day. You see, my dad and all his other band members got what cinema would call an offer that they couldn't refuse. This offer was to perform on some themed cruise headed for Costa Maya and Cozumel, and it would put about $1,000 in each of their pocket. With that kind of payment, my dad truly couldn't refuse. Unfortunately, the time of the cruise had coincided with a Thursday, a school day on the 2nd of April. My mom even had a trial to play defense for on that day. So, to our great disappointment, what followed that day of my father splitting for a paid vacation was a week consisting of photos sent by text message that made both me and my mother quite envious. I mean, he got to sip tequila and play music at the poolside, while I fought to survive my senior year, and my mother for her client's innocence. However, there were some photos that brought a smile to our faces, such as a lonely chicken that my father found just wandering the streets of Cozumel. So, to put it bluntly, our envy became that of jokes upon his return that following Friday. Almost as soon as he had walked through the door, my dad was spinning stories worthy of being put into a written biography. He told of how the massive Aztec structures that we'd been shown had played host to the likes of human sacrifice and bloodletting in past ages. Then followed up by stating how the two cities played host to their own music played by bands lesser known on the street corners after dark. Isn't it somewhat funny how my dad could go from unsettling to jocular in the blink of an eye? I found so much hilarity in it, as I share the same personality. I had always had a keen interest in the supernatural, especially when it comes to the subject in which my father discussed. Despite my Christian beliefs, the idea of such entities of myth invoking such taboo and violent behavior has never ceased to astound me. I just have so many questions as to why one would fear their own theories about existence so much that they would so willingly tear the heart from their own brother to appease such phobias. I just don't understand why they felt the need to do it. I assume it was for this reason that my dad brought back the skull. It was just before dinner when my dad called me into the kitchen for me to obtain it. When I entered, he was holding it up in a somewhat Shakespearean style, examining it for any scratch or bump that it may have received on the long journey home. He handed it to me and told me of its brief backstory. "How do you like it, Carl? I found it sitting on a table in one of those old temples. I thought you might be interested," he said. I didn't answer. I didn't want to give my honest opinion, as, truth be told, despite my interest in such weird and disturbing subjects, I found the thing to be quite unsettling. Let me first make clear that it was not real, but was actually made of ceramic. It was a work of art, carefully crafted by an unknown sculptor of past ages. I could make out hieroglyphics of starfish and leaves, as well as other inconceivable shapes. But the unnatural roundness and the images of apparent beauty were not enough to hide the uncanny nature of its face. Its eyes were both bordered in a deep shade of black, and the color streamed far down the sides of its face in 4 long lines of tears on either side. The mouth itself was quite pale, but consisted of these non-decaying human lips. The smile that these lips gave off was a wide, black-lined grin. I could feel the stiffening of hairs along my neck as I begrudgingly took the thing up to my room after dinner. I settled for the shelf that sat just above my desk and sat the thing down on its very end. I decided to go to bed early, So I locked my door, got dressed, and climbed into bed. Just as I was about to shut the light out, though, I climbed back out. I approached the shelf and then proceeded to turn the face towards the wall. Better, I whispered to myself. I wouldn't let that stare gaze upon me as I slept. The next morning, I awoke to much in the way of discomfort. Do you know that pain in your head, which a bad night's sleep so generously provides? Well, I could feel it, and I could feel it hard. It was almost at migraine level. Thankfully, I could slowly begin to smell the very best thing that one could awake to on a Saturday morning. I made my way to the stairs, ready for a great breakfast, and noticed the skull's glare out of the corner of my eye as I left the room. When the near migraine ceased, the day went by as any normal Saturday would. I had breakfast, I watched YouTube on my phone for a good hour, and then I played video games in my room for well into the night. Yes, as you might be able to tell from my routine, I'm not a very social child. I would even go so far as to say that I'm friendless, or even a goth with what creepy things I find interest in. It was about 10 after 11 when I finally decided to shut off the lights for some well-needed comfortable sleep. I locked my door and climbed into bed, but I just lay there in the silence. I was uncomfortable, suspicious even. I climbed out of bed once more and walked over to the skull on my shelf, which now appeared as even more awful in the dark. The designs almost appeared as one deep shaded color, and its shape seemed slightly off based on the shadows. The only apparent good thing was the fact that I could not make out the wide, black-lined smile that I previously mentioned. I got a burning sense of déjà vu as I then proceeded to turn the skull around and climbed back into bed for a good night's rest. I did not rest comfortably, though. Walking downstairs with the same apparent headache from the previous morning was only the least of my two worries on this particular Sunday. I walked groggily into the kitchen, and as I poured out some cereal, I could feel the eyes at my back. I turned my head to see my parents' stares from the kitchen table, both of which were formed into mild glares of disapproval. What? I asked them while yawning. What's the problem? My dad let out a brief sigh as he responded to me. We know that you were up late last night, he said. I was confused. What do you mean, Dad? You always let me stay up till 11. Why is it suddenly a problem? Okay, don't lie to me. You were up until 3. We could see it. See it? I asked him. Your light, my mom responded. We could see it from underneath your door. Are we not right? I was bewildered, speechless at their questions. I know very well from memory that my phone said 11 before passing out yesterday evening. Yep, it was only at least 3 or a little bit later. Give or take, my dad continued. Either way, Carl, why were you even up that late to begin with? I still couldn't supply them with a response. The headache had now faded, but even then, I could not think clearly enough to produce any words. I stuttered out. My parents just rolled their eyes and seemed to smile a bit. Look, it's no reason to be nervous, my dad informed me. You at your age, though, just need more sleep, all right? At least 8 hours is enough, not 4. I still had no words. Look, we're just gonna go get ready for church, my mom said as they both left the room. We love you, son. Don't tire yourself out, she said. I heard them both stop up the stairs as I just sat there alone with my thoughts. My thoughts, which were now scrambled and unfocused. It was when their door finally shut that I finally snapped back into normal focus and happened to notice that their phones were left sitting on the kitchen table. I checked the clocks on both, which shared exactly the same time, 8:30 a.m. I then checked my phone, 8:30 a.m. My state of bewilderment had now been worsened. I scarfed down my breakfast, and as I finished, I then heard both my mom and dad come strolling back down, both now fully prepared for mass. They were whispering, bickering to each other about what was quite obvious. I then rushed upstairs to get dressed as well, but I checked my parents' room before doing so. Their alarm clocks on either side of the bed also seemed to share the same readings, 8:40 a.m. I checked my phone, 8:40 a.m. it said. I slowly backed up, almost unhinged, into my own room across the hall. Upon entering, I noticed it. The skull. It was facing my bed once more, still smiling that same smile. At the first sight of it, I had assumed that it was my parents who may have laid their hands on it. And then we locked eyes. Its eyes. There was something residing deep within them. I was in too much of a panic to fall asleep that night. I was even too horror-struck to enter my own room, as I now assumed that it was cursed by that demonic corpse's head. Now, at this point, I would assume that you are asking questions somewhere along the lines of, why don't you just dispose of the skull? Well, I would rather ask you this. If you were almost certain that one of your belongings was haunted, and knew what I did about spirits and demons from religion, then would you even have the slightest bit of courage to lay another hand on it? At this point, I was hoping to, at best, convince my parents to let me sleep on the couch that evening. It took some effort, but they reluctantly submitted to it. This could not have been more of a blessing to me, as things became much more sinister once I went to brush my teeth in the upstairs bathroom. As I stared into the mirror, I could make out something from the reflection of the hall outside the open door. It was unclear at first, but I could now make it out. From under the crack of my bedroom door, there was a glow. It almost seemed to resemble my own lamp when switched on, but then I saw it pulse. It continued to do so in patterns, and I was already halfway down the stairs before it could continue. My parents were both already in their respective spots in bed, but did not fail to supply me with both a blanket and a pillow. I set both items up on the large sofa and turned out the lamp on the end table. I threw the blanket over myself and I lay there. That was it. I just lay there. Even with the distance that I had put between myself and it, I did not even have the slightest morsel of courage to shut my eyes. They fought my fears, however. They got progressively heavier and heavier with each passing minute, and after about 10 minutes in, my head fell to the side. I shot my eyes back open in the following second. Had it been a second, I thought to myself. I went to reach for my phone sitting on the coffee table, but I instead was hit with a harsh reality. My arm wouldn't move. My legs would not budge either, nor my head. I was overcome with terror as I now realized that my body was experiencing sleep paralysis. The only sign of fright that I could muster was the mad darting of my eyes as they searched the room with overwhelming anticipation. I knew what horror was to follow, but was not truly prepared for it in the least. My eyes panned over the room in desperate search for any sort of black spot, any shadow, or any other discoloration within the room, or even in the hallway that opened up next to the entertainment center. In my half-awoken state, I was struggling just to see anything clearly. It was all just a blur. It took about a minute or so, but then I noticed something. Atop the entertainment center sat a discoloration, a smidgen of white. I could not make out any other features, but that was only due to the blur of my vision. However, my attention to this object was broken as my ears then picked up on something else. A whisper. It came from my right. I threw my sight in that direction and happened upon yet another object. A shadow. A humanoid shadow. It was standing out in the hall, staring directly at me. Was it an intruder? Was my first thought. I had assumed it might have been, as they appeared to be wearing a mask. All that was visible of their face was a deep shade of red, whilst the rest of the figure was completely shrouded in the blackness of the night. It was motionless, not stirring even an inch. From it had obviously emanated the whisper, which I could still faintly hear. It sounded as if it whispered a single phrase, but I couldn't tell what it was saying. It just stared blankly in my direction, and I stared directly back. This went on for what seemed like more than 10 minutes, and all the while I felt as though my heart might stop from how hard and fast it was beating. The dark figure still maintained its glare on me as I could feel my muscles begin to slightly twitch. My legs sparked to life and began kicking sporadically, and my arms were then able to throw the blanket from my body. I then blinked. Nothing. Both objects of black and white had now dissipated. My heart began to slow back to its original pace as a wave of relaxation washed over me. It truly was just a hallucination. I wiped the sweat from my head with the back of my now mobile arm. Even with how calm I now felt, my mouth was so dry and my body was so drenched. I would probably need a shower in the morning, but all that I needed now was a glass of water. I turned my whole body to get ready to stand up and head for the kitchen. Suddenly, I felt a tremendous amount of pressure, as I thought I was being held down. My body pressed hard into the sofa as I stared in horror up at the ceiling. It was now right above me. I could make it out more clearly now, and it was enough for me to understand what monstrous being I now beheld. What I had once believed to be shadows was actually a long, black cloak. It ran all the way down to the very bottom of the entity, where it then split off into multiple torn strands. But without these strands, there appeared to be no true bottom to the entity at all. It was spectral, having no true physical form. Nevertheless, this did not distract me from my recognition of the dark figure's most blood-curdling feature, its mask-like face. No, not a mask. Its true face. The face certainly was one deep shade of red, but the same could not be said for its other features. The eyes on this thing were as massive and as black as the darkest recesses of space, almost appearing as though completely empty. In spite of their lifelessness, though, these eyes appeared to be weeping. The tears had color to them as well, the color of dripping ink. They ran in streams that dripped down the monster's cheek and onto its cloak, becoming one with its very color. The emotion this thing inhibited, the expression that it wore a large, wide, black-lined grin. What I had once feared happening before had now finally come to pass. My heart had exhausted itself. My chest became immobile as my lungs struggled desperately to take in oxygen. It almost felt as though this thing was somehow crushing every organ in my body, prohibiting me from ever taking another breath or even speaking. I tried to scream, but not even a choke could escape from me. That horrific smile, it was a smile of joy. Joy at the sight of my suffering. The whisper. It had returned. I could make it out. I could make it out more clearly now. It seemed to pass through my mind, rather through its lips and into my ears. Do it. The images followed. Those images. Do it. My parents. Do it. In bed. Do it. The blood. Do it. I stood over. Do it. The knife in my left hand. Do it. Two red objects in my right. Do it. My smile. My eyes. Do it. Were black. Do it. I was fading. I was fading fast. Soon I would be imprisoned, condemned, free for the taking by this ferocious incubus. There was no person, no other entity here to fend off this living nightmare. It was pure evil. Evil, evil. Do it, it whispered. Our Father, I strained out, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. The whisper was fading now. Do. The expression on its face, it was now a grimace. But deliver us, I finished, from evil. It was fading. It was fading fast. The pressure was now leaving me. In but the briefest of seconds did the nightmare become one with my memory. It had now vanished again into the metaphysical. But what had brought it into this realm in the first place was far from known to me. Then I sat up. The smidgen of white. The glow. It sat upon the coffee table now. I switched on the lamp behind me to better understand what I was really looking at. Once the lamplight began flooding the room, the glow then quickly dimmed. The skull. No, not the same one. This one was real. The proportions, the textures, the color, it was all real. There was blood on this decrepit thing. Blood. Large stains of it that covered the entire cranium and the jawline. The jaw was sitting wide open, almost appearing as though it was screaming in terror. If I knew any better, I'd say that it was part of one of the multiple remains of a murder victim, an unwilling participant of human sacrifice. It was changing now. The blood stains on it were cracking and shrinking. They then rose off and dissipated into the surrounding air, revealing starfish and other incomprehensible shapes. The paleness of the base of its eyes were darkening now, and so were the teeth as the jaw continued to cement shut. That decayed jaw began to grow back its lips as well, and those very same lips began to curl into that horrible smile, that grin. I got up well before my parents that morning. Hold on, let me reword that. I mean to say that I never even got up at all. I mean, how could I wake up if I never even fell back to sleep again? I just couldn't risk it with what insidious forces might be attempting another shot at me. I just couldn't. I made sure to let my parents know that I'd be leaving early for school. Claimed to them that I would be studying with some friends. Them being half asleep was the only possible way that they could have believed such a ridiculous lie. Even they, with what arrogance they had, would know better than to think of me as one having friends. When I stepped out onto the front mat, I could feel a chill sweep through the morning air. The low temperature persisted as I walked, an unusual level of coolness for this time of year. It got progressively worse the further that I hiked, and it reached its very peak upon eventually reaching my destination. Many a shiver climbed up my back as I stared silently upon the mist-clad waters of the Long Island Sound, knowing quite well that I could not hesitate any longer. I slipped on the pair of winter gloves I had packed with me, and then I began to unzip the rest of my backpack. I slowly cupped my hands around the contents of the bag, taking my time as I slowly began to raise it out with as much caution as humanly possible. I hesitated only for about a dozen seconds, and then I finished the job at last. The skull flew about 100 or so feet forward in one direction before then dropping vertically downward. It vanished into the fog that draped over the entirety of the coastal rocks below, and all I could do was listen. Splash. No, smash sat anywhere in between it. Not surprising, but still to my dismay. I could feel the air grow much warmer as the echo of the splash began to thin out. That was just a year ago this morning. No trace was left of its presence in my life, but that does not satisfy me in the least. As I type this up in my college dorm, all I can think of now is the world around me, and where in the world it might have gone. The only true bit of hope that I can hold on to is that it may have just returned to its ruin, undisturbed as it relishes in the remains of its first successful holocaust. It kills me even more to know what little I can do to stop it. Not even my parents may understand it, as they aren't even aware of its absence at this point. That is the cost of I being friendless, a goth. My facts do not matter anymore, as no person would so willingly defend them. There's no individual in existence to guarantee my saving grace. That just makes it all the more painful to bear this new fact. A fact that was once a burning question. Our ancient ancestors were not theorists. They were prisoners, hopeless and despairing. They had to do it.